Did you watch the US presidential election? Do you think something was a little off? Or maybe you can't understand why Trump keeps challenging the result. I'm your host David English. This is the English channel. Let's dive in and have a look. Welcome to my new YouTube channel. As you can tell by the title, I was mainly going to cover all things to do with England and Great Britain, but then the 2020 presidential election happened in America, and for me some things just did not add up, so I decided I would start there. It's important to add here, for censorship reasons, that I'm not disputing the result of the 2020 election whatsoever, either now or in the future. I'm not qualified to do that. And neither is the Associated Press. In fact, I'm not really going to comment on the election result itself, but more on the electoral system and how it works and how it appears to be broken. And if it isn't fixed, it will fail the American people for generations to come. However, what I would like to go through is just some of the things that happened on that night, and also some of the facts, figures and statistics that help me understand why Donald Trump isn't taking this lying down. I don't think there's a person in the developed world who doesn't know something about this last election in America. It was probably the most hotly contested election in a generation, if not several generations. We all know, well, we should all know the story by now. The election took place on November 3rd. At some point over the coming days, the Associated Press called the election for Joe Biden, which was then followed by a small handful of leaders from around the world also congratulating Joe Biden. Now again, I'm not disputing that. I'm not going to dispute this result at all. It's not up to me to make that judgment. But as I began to look at this and look at what went on, a few things struck me as being quite odd. To coin a phrase from our Atlantic brethren, the math just didn't add up. So, on the night of the election, I watched the election until around about 8 or 9 p.m. Eastern Time, which is about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning here. And Trump was surging ahead. I mean, yes, when the polls opened, Biden had a lead because of the postal vote, but by this point, Trump's numbers were going up in the tens of thousands as opposed to Biden's, which were just going up in the thousands. And I thought, this is a done deal. He's going to ride the horse home and that's it, I can go to bed. So I got up the next day and I found out that the election was still undecided and that Biden suddenly had all these votes that previously weren't indicated in the polling trajectory, and that Trump didn't really get any votes to speak of. Now the next thing I knew as I was looking into what had happened was that the Associated Press had called the election for Biden based on numbers that they had at the time and exit polls. It was basically an estimation. Now, a US election is not like a British election, where votes are counted by hand to the last vote to determine who won each electoral seat, and then the country. Whoever has the most seats wins the country. In America, the votes are quite often counted by machine these days, and counties and states can be conceded irrespective of whether the counting is finished or not. And at that point, once the concession is made, the counting stops. And likewise, an entire election can be conceded if a candidate can exert enough pressure on his opponent in a tight race to either make him think he's going to lose and will embarrass himself by continuing to fight on, or intimidate him to the point where he can't take it anymore and he caves in psychologically and concedes. It's a little bit like trash talk between two heavyweight fighters before the fight, except one of them would literally get scared into not taking part in the fight. Okay, now the first thing that struck me as odd about this was that the Associated Press called the election themselves based on exit polls and counts at the time. That's almost the equivalent of the Daily Mirror deciding an election in this country based on a reader's poll. But here's the thing, the medias don't call elections in America. Now, again, the process in America is slightly different to here. Here it's quite simple. You vote for a candidate in your county or seat whoever wins the most seats wins. In America, it's a little more different. What the people are voting for in the November election is their choice of elector, a sort of spokesperson to represent the people. The electors then meet in December and vote on their choice of president to be passed on to Congress. Then in January, that vote is ratified by Congress, and it is only then that the decision is truly made. Now, the reason it's like that is part of the extensive checks and balances that they have within the American legal and electoral system. And it's there to prevent the people from being duped into electing a bad president. Essentially, the electors could reject the people's choice and vote for a different candidate. They are referred to as faithless electors. And that brings me to my second oddity of the evening, the ballot dumps. At some point during the evening and early morning on the 3rd and 4th of November, the voting machines in key swing states, states which can be won by either party candidate and that have to be won to secure the presidency, were switched off. Not only were the machines switched off, but the independent adjudicators, or poll watchers as they call them, were sent home. Now, at the time they were switched off, Trump was leading by almost untouchable margins, the margins in the hundreds of thousands. But when they were switched on hours later, Trump's lead had not only vanished, but Biden was ahead by just enough to be in the lead. So when the data was examined, it could be seen that massive spikes of votes for Joe Biden occurred during that time period, with almost zero for Trump. In the words of the lawyer Sidney Powell, or Sidney the Kraken Powell, it was the equivalent of flipping a coin 180,000 times and expecting it to land on heads almost every time. Now again, due to censorship, I'm not saying that that didn't happen. I'm just saying that it's not likely to happen. Ever. But these aren't the points that interest me the most, because it's really up to a court of law to decide what these and the 11,000 eyewitness statements, over 200 sworn testimonies, security camera footage and scores of dead people who voted actually mean. And I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not disputing the final outcome of this election. Before I go any further, if you like what you're hearing so far and you'd like to see more from me, please hit the like button, press subscribe and share this video far and wide. It really helps a lot. Thank you. Now, the thing that interests me the most about this whole thing is the maths and the numbers of how many people voted and how they voted. I find it really interesting. And personally, I think it tells a story all on its own. So if we look at some of the numbers for what happened on the evening, Trump increased his margin by enormous numbers from his performance in 2016, an increase of 11 million votes, the third largest in history. His demographics across almost every category were up by massive percentage points. But then Biden apparently got more votes than Obama. It just doesn't make sense. So I started to research and to dig into it a little more, and this is what I found out. 95% of Republicans voted for Donald Trump, and he increased his support in the black community by over 50% compared to 2016, whereas Biden's fell by over 90%. He increased his vote with Hispanics by 35%, winning Florida, despite the media saying that he would lose. He won Ohio and Iowa and most of the other Rust Belt cities, but somehow Biden won Pennsylvania, Michigan and Wisconsin on the back of the same black vote that he lost 90% of. I mean, I don't know. To me, that would literally mean that Biden lost almost every black vote in the country except for those 3 states where he won almost every single black vote. It just so happens also that those states needed to be won to be able to win the presidency. Now again, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying it's rare. Astrologically, of course. But another statistical anomaly is that Biden somehow won the presidency, but the Republicans kept the Senate and took massive gains in the House. Now again, for people in England and the United Kingdom, there is a slight difference to the British system, whereby you only vote for a local representative who represents the party whose leader you want to win. In the US, you vote for a leader and state and county officials separate. And they normally have some correlation. So if you've generally voted for a Republican leader, you've generally voted for state and county Republican representatives. But in Biden's case, that wasn't the case. There was a lot of just Biden-only votes. So that would mean that people either simply didn't vote for any other candidate on the ticket other than Biden, or that they voted Democratic for their president and Republican for their representatives, which again is unusual. And I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm just saying it's unusual. Then we get to what I think are the two most perplexing figures of the night: the historic turnout and the historic victory. So in this election, Trump got over 74 million votes, which is a record for a presidential election. But Biden won with 80 million votes, an even bigger record. Now, that would mean that the total number of voters in the US election was a staggering 154 million people, the highest turnout in US history. By comparison, the 2016 election only had a turnout of 128 million. That's an increase of 26 million people, folks. That's 20%. That's enough for a small country. And the increases in population or immigration or even voter enthusiasm struggle to explain such a huge increase in numbers. Now again, I'm not saying that that didn't happen, but under the current YouTube censorship junta, I must clearly state that Joe Biden is obviously the chosen one. Now the final anomaly is the historic victories. Now, US elections have a fairly consistent turnout. It moves up and down by a few degrees, but nothing major. For instance, turnout in 2016 was 128 million. Turnout for Obama's historic win in 2008 was just under 130 million. And the 2012 election was 125 million. All within a few percentage points of each other. But the turnout in 2020 was a massive 154 million. Now, if the Democratic vote in 2016 was 68 million and Trump increased his vote share by 11 million, it's fair to say that he would have made a massive dent in the Democratic numbers as they swung to Trump. But Biden not only made this number up, he overshot it by millions of votes, somewhere between 10 and 15 million extra votes. Now what's odd about that is that Biden has won the lowest number of counties on record, some 523, compared to Obama in 2008, who won 873. And Obama only got 69 million votes. And yet Biden still won the election. It's truly miraculous. I mean, he essentially lost the country but won the election. It's certainly never been seen before. Again, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but if it's true, we're truly looking at, if it's true, we're looking at the finger of destiny, folks. And who are we to argue with such an authoritative digit? So my final thought is to leave you with this. We've just had an election between two men in their 70s. One, larger than life, with seemingly unending reserves of energy, who attended several rallies up and down the country, sometimes several a day, people queuing for days to get in, with crowds of tens of thousands in attendance and tens of thousands turned away. And the other, a gentleman who obviously has some mental decline, spent most of the summer in his basement, held rallies attended by 30 or 40 people, couldn't do a press conference without a teleprompter, and had trouble stringing a sentence together. So we had two men, one election. What do you think happened? So that's my overview of the election oddities, folks. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm not even going to tell you who won. I know who I thought won, but I want you to make up your own minds. I want you to look at the data rationally and critically, and I want you to stop listening to the MSM, who have essentially hidden all these facts from you. Go and check out true independent media such as the Epoch Times, NTD Television, Newsmax and OAN. I'll leave links in the descriptions below. Remember, you have to be in control of the information you receive. Do not allow the information you receive to control you. And if you like this video, please again hit the like and subscribe button, and don't forget to leave a comment below about who you thought won, what you thought really went on during the election night and subsequent days. I've been David English, you've been great, and I'll see you all on the next dive into the English Channel.